All right, today we're talking about systematizing the voice of your business, which is super exciting. If you don't love having to write all the copy, writing all of the emails, writing all of the promotion, writing your website, right? If you learn how to systematize your voice, you can teach anybody with good, I should say, writing skills to sound just like you, to have the values of your company. So I'm excited because today I'm bringing on a good friend, Brandon Lucero, who specializes in messaging. I actually had him help me for an entire year, writing different scripts, really diving in. He is a genius, literally. And I can't wait for you to hear how you can start to do this, systematize it, and spread it through your entire team. So let me introduce you to Brandon Lucero. Hi, Brandon. Welcome to Well-Oiled Operations.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I want to say welcome back. You were never on Well-Oiled, but you were on the original podcast, one of the original. I feel like I've changed my name a few times. I'm excited to catch up. We have been friends for a few years, and I'm excited to bring your zone of genius to our listeners. So little backstory for everybody listening is Brandon has helped me with some of my messaging. And I was a client of Brandon's for a while where we really dove into, he actually came to my home and shot in my house a bunch of videos and helped with messaging. And I was so lucky to have you here because anytime I would say something, it was like, you knew the hook, you knew the story, you knew what I should say. And I feel like I'm getting better at that. And it's such a skill set that I think we all need to have, especially as the vision of our business, right? The visionary of our business. So excited to have you here. Can you kind of give a little background of your story, your entrepreneurial journey, and we'll go from there?
Yeah, sure. So, I've been in this business for 11 years, but like the 2-minute version of my story is basically like I went to college just to run. I did not know what I wanted to do. And then my dad started a business and it was like taking off. And he's like, why don't you just come work for me? Because I actually had a scholarship to run a cross-country track. And then I got diagnosed with Lyme disease. I broke my back. And I was like, okay, that's just running's out of the equation now. So I did that. And then his business did well, but then eventually went under. And I got to see a lot of mistakes as to like why that happened. But the point is like I was left with no college degree. I had no experience in really anything. And I didn't really know what to do. So I just started going online, trying to find like whatever I could. I remember building websites for $50 and it would take me like all day to do. Like I needed money so bad, walking door to door, trying to sell anything I could. And eventually started a company called Sold with Video, which was doing real estate videos for real estate agents. And that was also a very hard thing to do because I realized 1% of real estate agents make all the money for the most part. Like a lot of them just are getting started or they just don't have the money to invest in this sort of thing. And that led me to learning YouTube SEO. Like, well, maybe they'll pay for the ranking. And then that led me to now creating video content for local businesses like plumbers and bakeries and yoga studios and getting it ranked in the search results, which then led me to, it's a long story. Like there's a lot of connection points I got. Yeah. Led me to working with one of our mutual friends, James Wedmore, and we created a product teaching other people how to then go to their local market and build a video business around that. And then through a series of churns and events, like I just started creating video marketing stuff. And through that journey, I remember just sitting there one day, James is like, you're really good. Like you're good with the video. He's like, but you're really good with like the messaging. And I was like, I don't, what do you mean? And he's like exactly what you're describing, Stacy. He's like, you know what the hook should be. You know where to go with someone. You know where to insert the pain point. And he's like, you do it better than anyone I know. And I've worked with a lot of people. Maybe you should do that. And I was like, maybe I should. And then so James is like, well, can I hire you to like rewrite my video series? And I said, sure. So he paid me for 2 days of my time, and him and I locked ourselves in a room and wrote it. And he was doing $800,000 launches, and the very next launch did $3 million. And he's like, dude, you got to go all in with this. And so that's what we did. And then over the last couple of years, all we've been doing is just working with all sorts of different businesses, teaching them basically how to communicate in a way that drives results and creates demand and gets people to realize, I like this person, I trust this person, and I want to work with this person or buy from this person or this business. And that's basically all we've done. And we've been really successful with it the last couple of years. And that's where we are today.
So good. Well, and here's the thing, somebody listening, right? Maybe they've struggled at some point trying to sell something like, oh, I put out this email, no one's buying, right? I thought this big promotion was going to be huge, but it kind of flopped. And they assume it's the product, it's the offer, right? a lot of times it's just there was like mismessaging opportunity, right? You didn't really convey what it was going to be. I always think like, oh, this great idea. And I can put 3 sentences out and everybody's going to run and like check out and buy. And then nothing happens, right? So I think the messaging piece is key. And you almost want to ask yourself, what are you about to give up on? That is just like, one big like messaging tweak away from really being what you want it to be. So
yeah, I mean, can I give an example just like you can demonstrate that a little bit further? So what I tell people is like, when you have great messaging and communication and marketing, people should want what you sell before they even know what's for sale. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that you need a good offer, right? That you need all of that stuff. You need a good strategy. But like in our last launch, for example, we did $300,000 in sales before cart even opened because there were that many people going like, I attended your 3-day event. Like, Jim, can I just buy? I want to buy. I know it's coming on Monday, but and we had $300,000 in sales. They didn't know what we were selling. And it's the same thing even for like a local based business who has local traffic, like here's the example I always give. If you're in a car and your car's driving down the road and you hit 40 miles an hour and it starts shaking, you have no idea why. And you're like, this is weird. Hit 40 miles, starts shaking. You're driving, and let's just say it's the timing belt. I don't know if that's true or not, or I don't even know what a timing belt is, but let's just pretend that's what it is. And you're driving down, you see a sign that says, timing belts, $15, we can fix it in 15 minutes. But all you know as the driver is that your car is shaking when you hit 40 miles an hour. You're not aware that it's the timing belt. And so what you're going to do is you're going to drive right past that sign. But if you see a second sign from another mechanic and it says, is your car shaking when you hit 40 miles an hour? We can fix it for $15 in 15 minutes. Well, guess what? You're going to pull over to the side of the road and you're going to get it fixed. And then they start the conversation of like, yeah, it's a timing belt. We have the best timing belts. We have the best service, blah, 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 blah. But the point is when we talk so much about product or solution first without building that bridge, we're not speaking the awareness level of our audience. And I don't care what business you're in, we have to speak to the awareness level of our audience so that their subconscious, their automatic reaction is, that's me, that's the problem. And then we can start to focus on the other things. But most people miss that stuff. Does that make sense?
Completely. And you're right. It's like we're talking like everybody knows what we sell and why it benefits them when a lot of them don't, right? They don't even know they should be listening. So they're tuning us out and not even like diving into what you want them to see and hear. So I think this is huge. So one of the things that we were talking before we started, and I love this idea of like systematizing the voice of your business. So I kind of want to share what I've experienced as we've grown and we hire and we bring on a copywriter and then we bring somebody in social media and we bring on, you name it, right?
Yep.
And all of a sudden, all of this amazing help is doing a great job, but it's losing me. It's losing the voice of the business, like you said. So can we just talk about like what that looks like and what the problem is? Like, why is that a problem? If I want to have an ads writer and, somebody on my social media writing and somebody doing my emails, why is that a problem?
Yeah. So when we start working with clients, the very first thing we have to do is like, first of all, just discover what the message is. Like, what is your deeper purpose? What are the problems you're solving? What stories are the ones that connect the most? And it's all just, honestly, it's just testing. That's like step number one is just testing and just letting the data tell you this one's connecting, this one's landing, this one's not. And I think first of all, as the business owner, you have to get out of your ego to be like, no, this is what it is. And this is the problem. It's like, there's 1.5 million ways to communicate everything. We have to figure out what's landing so we're not guessing. And we also have to figure out what's landing with you, like what feels good to you. We need to find both of those things together. Once those two things are together, we need your entire team to be on board with those things. Because if they're not, you're going to do exactly what you kind of just described, which is like, you're going to hire a social media person, you're going to hire a copywriter. For us in my business, we'd use a lot of webinars. We're going to maybe hire someone to create the slides for the webinar. Yep. But now if you're not careful, you have 3 individual people with 3 individual communication styles, with 3 individual understandings of what your business is or may not be. And then you have them designing your marketing, your advertising, your voice, and there's nothing consistent. And so what we need to do is kind of create a sort of centralized I call it a nucleus or a North Star of the major messaging things that these people can pull through. And so like in our business right now, we have a copywriter, a social media person, and then myself doing all the messaging, but you can't really tell who wrote what because of the system we built to deploy the messaging once we discovered what was working.
I feel like that's amazing, but that's not the norm, right? Usually you can tell, oh, somebody's writing the Instagram post, and then somebody's different writing these emails, and oh, this is the weekly email, but then the launch email, is like way better written, right? So all of a sudden it starts to feel very disconnected, I think, too, with our person who might have been in and now is out, or vice versa, right? You just never know. How do we start that process? And is it something where, I think sometimes people think, but I'm not good at messaging, right? So I should hire the copywriter and let them come in and bring the messaging. What do you think?
There's yes and no to that. So as a copywriter, if they're good, they should have an understanding of direct response and what can move people. But there's also certain things that we need to take into consideration, which is who are we attracting? What are their values? What are their identities? Now, the copywriter might be able to write really great copy, but if you're using the identity of stay-at-home mom or something in all of your messaging, because that's who you want to attract, and then they're like, oh, I got it. And then they're just using mom. It may not seem like a big difference, but what's going to start to happen is you're going to start to attract people that are not stay-at-home moms, but are moms, either they're working professionals. But if your offer and thing you sell is catered to stay-at-home moms, well, now you're attracting the wrong people because you're using similar, which may go unnoticed, identities from each other, and you're not on the same page. And so, yes, I think it's great to hire a copywriter, but having these core fundamental things where everyone's on the same page is highly important. So some of those things would be like the identity. What is the thing that you say that the audience goes, that's me? Automatically, they're just like, yep, I self-identify with that. That's me.
Yeah.
The other thing is values. What are their values? So if a value you want to have your customers to have is maybe you own a gluten-free bakery and they care about health. You want to use health, or maybe they have autoimmune disease, which is why they need gluten-free. Those are all certain values and identities that you want to use and have your entire team on that. Now, the other thing is just because you have an identity or a value, it doesn't mean it actually works. So now you need to figure out which ones actually work. And again, if your copywriter is a great copywriter but doesn't know these things, then they're just going to be like the wild, wild west, writing things they think are good, which still are incongruent. So all of these messaging elements, and there's a few of them, have to be communicated to the entire team so that when they do write their great copy, they're injecting these things. So you're attracting the right person, you're creating the demand and all of that stuff.
One thing that I used to do that I just look back and think, oh my goodness, what a waste of time and money, is when I would hire a copywriter and then they would go, okay, well, I obviously need to know about your person, so fill this out. And I would do it so fast and so quick and just oh, I don't know, I think it's this, or yeah, say this. And then they would give me the copy and I'd be like, oh, it's kind of generic, or it's not that, I'm like, well, hello, Stacy, they're literally grabbing off the document you filled out, which was generic and not that, and very vague, right?
Yeah.
So I think I've learned of really, really dialing, who is my person, right? What should they know? What should they, what do I have to really specify? And one thing really cool that we did recently is not just talk about a person we're attracting, but we actually identified our biggest case studies, our biggest testimonials. And we know how much revenue they make. We know how many team members they have. We know all of these things. So we've even shifted our marketing to being that person, right? To talk like that person, to attract the person who's going to get the best results from our program.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is understanding that stuff. And it does, as the business owner, we have to uncover those things first and then again, communicate it. But that's exactly what happens, is you get very generalized sort of communication when these things aren't dialed in. It's not really, there's not a whole bunch of them. It's number one is you have to understand the three biggest problems that you solve and what they are specifically. How do you say overwhelmed without saying overwhelmed? It's well, instead of saying you're overwhelmed, it's you yell at your kids minimum 2 times every morning, get them to eat their food, and then you're running 5 minutes late on average out the door just to get them to school. It's that gets someone to go okay, that's me. But then that phrasing just is given to the team so that you say, hey, when you talk about a problem, use this one, use this one, use this one. So problems are really important. Then we need the connection points. So what stories do you tell and what points do those stories prove?
Yeah.
Those are really important too. So on my document for my team. I'm like, hey, if you want someone to agree with you when you tell them this, use this story because this story proves that, and I already know it works. And so we have a whole list of stories. We also have a whole list of metaphors. So when one of the lines I use in my business is how-to content is not how to build a business online. And I use like the encyclopedia versus a TED Talk. Both are educational, one's way more engaging. So we have all these like proven things that like now my copywriter or my social media person can use. And the feedback or the objection I get from a lot of people is like, well, Brandon, aren't you just saying the same thing over and over again? It's like, yeah, like messaging should be consistent. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time you talk. That's exhausting. And what I've realized is that sometimes people need to hear things 5 or 6 times before they actually get it, or because they're growing, they're evolving, the lens in which they hear something changes. So they may hear the same words, but it lands differently with them every time they hear it. Yep. So consistency in messaging is really important. And then my document, it does grow, it does change. Our process and our messaging does change, but it's slow. It's like every month it might be a 5% change to what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're recording this getting towards the end of the year. And I've even already started thinking about, how do I want to, maybe like, how do I want to, like you said, like the 5% change in the messaging for next year? How do I want to up level that? What is it going to look like? And I'm going to roll that out to my team to say, hey, I know sometimes we say, for instance, like I sometimes will say, and if you're a solopreneur, and we just said, we are not like, that is not our ideal person. Yeah, right. Solopreneurs will buy our programs. However, we are truly for somebody who already has a team and wants to really clean it up. So we're just rolling out, no more saying solopreneur, or if you're a solopreneur, we're just assuming our person has a team of 1 person or more.
And that's a really big thing too, because you start to realize those small words, although they can seem insignificant, they make all the difference. And when you work with clients, you go like, why am I, like, I want to attract people that are at a 6-figure business. And I'm like, okay, so what problems are you starting with? And they're like, well, I keep using the problem of like, is your content not working? And I'm like, dude, someone's at 6 figures, like they figured that out already. Yeah, they're more like, how do I bring on team and be able to afford them? Or like, I'm making money, but not enough to like delegate. Like those are the sorts of problems that people that just hit 6 figures are experiencing. And they're like, I got it now. Yeah. So sometimes you just really have to understand the person you want to attract and use that, and then make sure the entire team understands this is how we say it, what we say. But here's one thing too that I've realized is that you also need to give them a little bit of freedom. Like they need to be, because they will spot things that you maybe didn't spot. And so I do leave room. What I call is like our 70% rule. I say just follow this system to about 70%. And then you have a 30% margin to like test and play around with. Okay. And if you play around with something and it works, let us know, and then we can add it to the document. So that way, if I have 3 people working on messaging, I'll have 3 soldiers, so to speak, like trying to uncover how do we evolve. So it's not always on my shoulders either. So you can use your team to like sort of figure out how to evolve this to the next level.
Yeah. Okay. I love the idea of like, up until this point, it needs to be here, but you've got a little room just in case, because you're right. Somebody in the marketing role should be playing around. They should be testing. And if they're only testing with what you've been doing, right, you're never going to outperform yourself. So I love giving them a little bit of freedom and a little bit of leeway to play around and let them split test and things like that. So good. And you had said something earlier about like, don't just keep saying the word like overwhelm, because that I see that a lot too, is like sometimes people say the phrase or say the word that they are aware of, but the person doesn't identify as that. They just don't know that's what it is. Right. I remember I had somebody who used to, they were like an anxiety coach, and she kept saying like, I help anxious people. Yeah. And then I would never have said I'm an anxious person. And then all of a sudden she starts like giving like bullet points. And I'm like, oh, I might be anxious sometimes. Like it was just not a word I would ever have said ever. Right. And then when she described it like you did with overwhelm, it was like, oh, I definitely have done like X, Y, Z. Okay, maybe there's moments when I have anxiety, right? So I think it's important too to, like what you're saying is keep it consistent. But how can you keep it consistent and give different examples? How can you keep it consistent and go deeper, right?
Yeah. And that, like what you're describing, is a part of like the beginning process of uncovering what messaging to actually give to your team too. Can I give a metaphor, like a situation to really like explain this? Because what people sometimes don't realize is that there's 2 types of trust we need to build. it's like the trust of I like you as a person to person, like I just like you as a human being. But they also need to trust in your ability to solve their problem. Otherwise, they'll just never buy, no matter how much they like you. So one of the best ways to do that is doing exactly what you're describing is don't say anxious, describe anxious. Instead of saying anxious, you describe the situation. And what happens is people start to self-identify, oh my God, that's me. Yeah. So the example I like to give is like, let's imagine you have stomach pain and it started at 7:00 at night and ends at 8, and it's been going on for 2 weeks. And you're like, I have no idea what this is. Totally weird. Just an hour at night. You go to 9 doctors and 9 doctors tell you like, I have no idea what's wrong with you. You're probably going to feel like sad, depressed, like there's no end in sight. But you go to the 10th doctor and you don't even have to say a word. You don't say anything. You walk in the door and they take one look at you and they go, let me guess, stomach pain starts at 7:00 at night, ends at 8, probably started about 2 weeks ago. And you're going to feel like, oh my God, someone understands me. There's a solution, like this person can help me. Now, if that doctor said, oh, you have stomach loop and just, I don't know, I'm just making something up, stomach loop. And then they walk out and they go, well, good luck. What are you going to do? You're going to chase that doctor down and be like, what's the solution? Like, help me. But that doctor never gave you any testimonials. They never gave you their degrees. They never told you about their certifications. They didn't read you case studies, which, by the way, all those things can help. I'm just trying to prove a point. They didn't need it in order to create a demand for you to want to work with them. And they didn't even say they had a solution to it. And that's the power in this style of messaging is that's exactly what happened with you is you didn't identify as an anxious person, but when they started to describe it, you self-identified, oh my God, that's me. And when you can gain that moment with your audience, that's when you gain the trust in your ability to solve their problem, and it creates demand at the same time. That's one of the most powerful things you can do with messaging. And again, if you do not delegate how to communicate to those, what are the problems, what are the symptoms you use, and how do you say those symptoms, and your team's not using it, then your team is literally running copy, emails, ads, social posts, missing the most powerful piece of marketing, which is actually the very first piece. It's you always say the first impression is the biggest part. That's how we nail the first impression. And if we're not careful with it, it just gets completely lost with when we bring onto our team.
Yeah, so good. And this was something we just did at our studios. We hired a new Facebook ads person to come in and set them some things up. And it was funny because the person that kind of runs a little bit in the marketing department was like, hold up, she's using like phrases we never use. She's, and I kind of said what you had said was, but 70% of it is what we do. I kind of want to see if she's smarter than us in some of these areas, right? Yeah. Like, no, I know we've never said that, but it is true. Let's just see if that, the hook all of a sudden makes it different, right? And it was something as simple as like, I think she said something like, Oak Creek and Franklin parents, which are the 2 cities my studios are in. And my front desk or my marketing person said, yeah, but we serve lots of other places. And I said, yeah, but I don't even live in those cities, but I live close to those cities. So if I saw that, I would identify as somebody who would be interested in hearing that, right? So don't be so like tight gripped on what you're currently doing, right? Allow that little bit of room to test and see what's out there.
100%, especially when it comes to ads. Like ads, I feel like are a different ballgame than like email, social. Because our philosophy, we used to have an agency that ran ads. And so our philosophy was like, you just never know what's going to work. And the amount of times I thought something was going to work and it didn't, is through the roof. The things that I didn't think would convert at all of a sudden do. And we actually did this really interesting test. We looked at like how many ads we've run over the past 2 years, and it's close to 20,000 ads, like different variations of copy and creative and stuff like that. And we looked at how many of them were actually successful. And when I say successful, it's like producing leads at the cost that we want. And about 25% of them were successful, which means 75% were not. So when it comes to ads in particular, our approach when we do a launch or any sort of promotion is at minimum, we want at least 5 different variations of ads and copy. So what I'll do is I usually will write like 1 or 2 myself to set the tone of for the team, for a copywriter. And what I tell them is write something similar, but using different variations. And then I give them then I said, just go crazy with 2 other things, write whatever you want. I don't even care. Again, it's just that test. We have 4 that are in alignment and 2 that are kind of in alignment, but are more of test. And we just wait and see. And with ads, it's great because you can just turn them off. It's not working, bam, turn it off, and people never see it again.
Yeah. It's also, first of all, I teach delegation, right? Unless Like copywriting is your zone of genius and it's like all you want to do and you're always going to keep it on your plate because you just love it, right? That is like 99% not the people listening, right? So if it's something you do want to eventually delegate and get off your plate, I think having this system is going to make you feel really good and comfortable that your team has this data, right? Like for instance, I rarely like swear, okay? I'm not offended by it. I always say like, I'm married to an ex-police officer. Nobody swears more than police officers. Like, trust me. Yeah. But I just don't usually do it. So I have to make sure people in copy know, do not curse in a social media post. Don't put that in an email. Like I wouldn't say that, right? There are certain things I would say, I wouldn't say, right? Certain words I use all the time. Even giving them like those keywords, those buzzwords that you are using will help make it even stronger too. So it's like, what do you never say? What do you say? Like, what does that look like? Put all of that down. I think that'll be so helpful. Yeah,
that's just one thing I didn't really address, and I'm glad you brought it up, is like putting down what not to say also, and how not to speak is just as important as what to say as well. Yeah. But again, when all this is dialed in, it's like, because I don't know about anyone listening, but for me, it was like writing copy and emails. And it is like one of the biggest time sucks inside of my business. And to be able to like finally get to a place where like 70% of that is off my plate is just so refreshing. Feels so good.
For sure. I have a friend who has like a document like this that you're talking about. And I heard one of her things is no Jesus jokes. And I was like, what is this? And she's like, somebody was in my DMs chatting and they like made a joke about Jesus. And I was like, absolutely no Jesus jokes. And I think that's hilarious that like, who would even think to do that? Right. But you have to literally put things down that you would never do. You want to see happening, all of the things. So I just think that's so funny.
Well, I'm going to kind of add one thing to that real quick. You know, one of the things that we found with the messaging is that like, as a business owner, you have to be in alignment with it. And what I'll just use, well, maybe I won't use I'll use the swearing one. If you are someone that swears and someone gets offended by it, that doesn't automatically mean like putting no swearing on the document, because you don't want it there, not because it's offending people, because that's just not who you are. Yeah. So I want to be very clear is like the things that you put no on the document about are just like things that you aren't, you know, like for example, my team started to say certain things inside of our brand. And I'm like, that's not me. Like, I wouldn't say it that way. I don't want to go that angle with it. Yeah. That's not something I really want to take a stand for. So like, let's not talk about that anymore. Yeah. So it's not like, oh, I offended someone, that's a no-no and put on the document. It's like, no, it's okay offending people. Like, we're not going to make everybody happy. It's more about you being in alignment with you, and whatever's not alignment with you kind of goes on that doc, especially if it's offending people. But you kind of keep that in mind too, because you don't want to lose yourself in your voice to the external influences that may be going on.
1000%. Yeah. And people always meet me. They're always like, oh, well, you're just like you are online. And that's because I really am. And you want to be that too. If you're never swearing and then in person, you're like dropping F-bombs every other word, it's very out of alignment. So I absolutely believe like be who you are, no matter what form or copy or platform or anything like that.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay. Yep. Okay. I wanted to ask you, we almost got into it, but like a lot of times with ads, we'll have a winning ad and it's crushing. And then all of a sudden it's not. And it's like, how long do I keep trying? Is it just the algorithm? Is it truly the messaging, the market? When do I give up? When do I start from scratch? What do you think on that?
Every ad has a lifetime or lifespan on it. Okay. We have one ad that's been working for like 3 years. It blows my freaking mind. But I already know like there's going to come a time and a point where this just doesn't land anymore. And I think part of the reason why is because there is just a certain amount of people in the market you're going after. And if you keep running the same things, like you're eventually there's no one else to see it anymore. And that kind of kills the lifespan of it.
Right. Because something that's new and fresh, you're going to get a lot of attention. And then pretty soon the frequency hits.
Yeah. And then also there's like people that will copy your ads and your angles and things like that too. So now like that certain message is like times 2 or 3 or whatever it may be. But for us, when we have an ad that's working and then all of a sudden it's just not working, and it's what to me not working means it's just very obvious. It's like you're going from $8 leads to all of a sudden you're struggling to get like 15 or 60, like it almost doubles in cost. It's like, all right, this just doesn't have its legs anymore. But when it's something like goes from $8 leads to like $10 leads, it's like, well, okay, let's look at this. Is it still profitable? Like but to me, those are signs of this is kind of losing its legs. For us, it's not really, I haven't seen the algorithm cause major issues from like $8 to $16.
Okay.
We have seen like little things like 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 sort of jumps.
Okay.
But for us, it always comes down to messaging and creative. If something is scaling, no matter what the algorithm is doing, if you have the message or the copy combined with the creative that just lands, you'll hit it out of this park. And to just give you a quick example, we had an ad, like our ads, we saw just were not as effective. And those were the conversations we had. It was like, is the algorithm changing or what's going on? And I said, let me try something. And I just went to our podcast and looked at our most downloaded episode over the past 12 months. And I was like, I'm going to do something on this topic. I created a PDF guide on that topic. We ran copy and messaging using the same thing I talked about on the podcast. And our ad costs and our downloads were like $16. This one started producing leads for $3. And it was just the right angle, the right problem with the right creative that people were like going through. And I already knew it works because I just looked at the data of our podcast and tried it. And it was like, bam. So I'm just, from my experience, I just see like when things, the algorithm can affect stuff, but there is a lifespan on everything. And the right angle, the right problem, communicating the right way will always work.
So good. Okay, Brandon, we could sit here and chat all day, but we need to wrap it up. So where can people, I know you have an amazing podcast that dives in even deeper to everything we've been talking about. Can you share where they can find you, best places online, all the things?
So our Instagram is Brandon Lucero. So we post content and stuff there, but really the podcast is the number one place. It's called the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. And we talk all things messaging. I also talk life. I talk about having kids while running a business. I talk about my lessons in growing a multi-million-dollar business. I was broke when we started this business, living with my in-laws to where we are today. So we talk about all of those sort of lessons and everything in between. So if you liked today's conversation, you'll love the podcast. It's the New Generation Entrepreneur. So I would head over there.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time and so fun catching up.
Yeah, Stacy, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.